So this is our 4th week. This was originally supposed to be one message in a series that I was planning. All the other messages I had to scrap because once I did that one message on anxiety, I realized right away, I can't just do one message on this. It's too big a subject. And so it turned into 2 and then 3 and now this is the 4th. And I promise this is the final. We're done talking about anxiety. But it is such a problem as I'm going to show you. And I've been talking about in this series altogether. Anxiety in and of itself is a good thing. So anxiety, we've been saying, is just your body's natural response to perceived danger. So imagine tonight you're lying in bed and about to fall asleep. You know what it's like? You're just drifting off and all of a sudden you hear a window breaking in your living room. You're going to feel anxiety, right? Something shattering a window in your house. That's not good. Right? So you're going to feel anxiety. So anxiety is just your body's preparation to go deal with something that's dangerous. Either you're going to go toward it or you're going the other way. You're running away, right? So anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. The danger is when anxiety gets out of control in your life. And we've been saying, one of the illustrations I've been saying all through this part of this teaching is, think of it like a car alarm. So you got a car alarm. Car alarm's a good thing. If we're in here right now and all of a sudden somebody's car alarm goes off and we hear smashing glass, we know what's happening, right? Somebody's trying to break into your car. They really want all the change or the leftover Quick Trip cup you got in there. They just really want that. So they're breaking in to steal that right now. And a car alarm is a good thing, but if every time a cat walks by your car and brushes against the car with their tail, the alarm goes off, is that now a good thing? Not a good thing. You are going to be so annoyed if every time it starts raining, the car alarm goes off. Because that's not the purpose of it. So anxiety can get spun up, and I've been asking you to think of it like this. Think of it like a dial. Like inside your brain, you have an anxiety dial. Some of you, your dial just hardly ever moves. Normally, my dial for anxiety is set at 0. I just don't feel a lot of anxiety. But I have situational anxiety, like so many of you do. And I've been saying, imagine if you were supposed to come up here and finish this message. 90% of people hate public speaking, and all of a sudden your dial will go up, right? So this doesn't trigger any anxiety for me, but when I have to confront someone I love about a very important issue, my dial goes way up. Because in the history of my life, that hasn't gone very well. So it creates a lot of anxiety for me. That's one of the situations. Some of you relate to that anxiety. When you have to confront someone you love, you'd rather just be quiet and take it than say something. It generates so much anxiety for you. There's situations that can spin that dial up. But unfortunately, there are people who the dial is up all the time. They live with anxiety. I was talking to someone recently. They said every day when they wake up, they feel anxious. And some days, it spins up to 8, 9, or 10. And some of you know what that's like, or some of you love people that this is how their life is. They live with this much anxiety. And so I was talking to my counselor this last week about the subject of anxiety, and I was just picking her brain on this, and I said, why is this? And she said, well, for many people, that anxiety dial is up because of trauma they've suffered through. And trauma is the consistent word that they use, trauma. If you've suffered trauma, then anxiety is often the outcome of that. If you were raised in a home with an abusive parent, you suffered trauma. You never knew when you were safe or not safe, so you always had to be on alert. If you were, I knew someone who was raised in a home with a parent who was an addict. They never knew what they were going to find when they walked through the doors. And the trauma of that experience as a child spun their dial up. I have another friend who was raised in a home with an alcoholic parent. And again, not the happy kind. You know, some people are happy drunks. This wasn't the happy drunk kind. And so every time they came in, every time the parent walked in, they never knew what they were going to be encountering. And so the consequence of that is the anxiety was spun up high. Other people, the trauma was their mom or dad were incredibly critical people. Nothing they could ever do was ever right. And so you were always on edge because anything less than perfection was going to get criticized for you. And so it was traumatic to be raised in a home like that. And so the dial got spun up. So my counselor was explaining all this. This happens. And so Statistically, here's where we're at as a nation. I've quoted you this before. 40 million Americans over the age of 18 suffer from anxiety disorders. 40 million. We're not saying they have situational anxiety. We're saying their dial is spun up high all the time and then sometimes really high. This is an epidemic. It's so interesting. We are so concerned about the pandemic, but this is the real epidemic. Mental illness issues in America, especially with anxiety. And the real sad statistic I only discovered last week from Forbes magazine, 36% of people with anxiety disorders get help. Only 36. 64% of people who have anxiety disorders never tell anyone and never get any help with it. That's incredibly sad to me. Because anxiety makes your life small. Anxious people seldom take risks. Anxious people will not pray the prayer, God, here's my life, use me any way you want. They will not pray that prayer because they're so anxious about what God will ask them to do. And so they miss out on everything God has for them. And I hate that for them. God wants you to experience joy and an adventure with Him, and it's only on the other side of anxiety. And the good news, and I've been saying this every week, and I've been studying this for 5 weeks now. 5 weeks I've been studying the subject of anxiety, reading from psychologists and Christian psychologists and secular psychologists and listening to podcasts, everything I can find on this subject, and no single person who treats anxious people for a living ever says anything other than it's 100% treatable. 100% treatable. They all say that. The people who are working with anxious people will all tell you, yeah, you can learn how to spin that dial down. Isn't that good news? That is really good news for the people I love who struggle with anxiety. That's why we're doing this series. So we're finishing up this series today we've called How to Hold It All Together, because life certainly has had other plans in 2020. And so we're going to finish by talking again about what do you do when you're feeling anxious, and this is the fourth part of this. So I want to ask you to open your program and grab your notes inside and grab a pen. While you're getting your notes out here, we of course want to say good morning and welcome to those of you who joined us on YouTube, or to those of you who joined us at our website at PenndaleChurchLife.com. Again, the notes are right there too. You can follow along. And we've been talking about 3 major triggers the last 3 weeks. What are the things that trigger our anxiety and how do you deal with it? And so we're going to do our final trigger today. The main one of the main ones is the fear of failure or loss. And the question is, what goes on in my head when things are not perfect? What goes on in my head when things are not perfect? That's what you got to try and figure out. What's going on in your head when things are not perfect? And when I started this series all those weeks ago, I told you that one of the things I'd done is I watched this 2-part seminar on anxiety by one of my favorite Christian psychologists, Dr. Henry Cloud. Brilliant, brilliant man. Does this. He's been doing this his whole career. And he talked about major triggers that he's encountered with anxious people. And so if you're going to really identify the problem, the cause of your anxiety, you got to understand what the major triggers are, and then you got to learn how to adapt to those triggers. So this was one that he came up with again in his experience in counseling, is that this gap, what goes on in my head when things aren't perfect, this is a major trigger. It's what he calls the threat of imperfection. I like that phrase. What goes on when things are not perfect? And so there were some questions he asked. If it's not perfect, is it all bad? If it's not perfect, is it all bad? Some of you are like, no, of course not. No big deal. If it's not perfect, we'll just make it better next time. But people who struggle with anxiety, they don't answer that way. If I'm not perfect, am I all bad? You ever been in a relationship with somebody that you felt like you had to be perfect to be with them? Some of you, again, this is the home that you were raised in. It's like perfection made you to the point of accepted. It certainly didn't get you to the point of loved. But you had to be perfect just to be at that baseline of acceptance. Oftentimes what you're dealing with is somebody who's highly anxious. If I have a problem with you, are you all bad? That's a common one. If I have a problem with you, are you all bad? Because imperfection in a relationship or in a person or in myself triggers anxiety for these people. They're so afraid of the outcome of that. So last week we talked about one of the triggers, and we said that one of the outcomes of being anxious is controlling controlling behavior or critical behavior. Have you ever tried to have a relationship with someone who's highly, highly critical? Do you have anyone in your life right now who is highly critical? Sometimes the root of that is anxiety. So here's what one psychologist wrote. It said, perfectionists, that's why part of why they're so critical is that you have to be perfect just to be at that baseline with them. Perfectionists crave predictability. They want to know they can succeed at something before they try. They are demanding and critical of themselves and often others too. This is the interesting thing. For those people that in your life that you can think of that are really, really critical toward you, the reality is if you could get inside their head and see what they're saying to themselves, you would be heartbroken by the level of criticism they level against themselves. Some of these people become perfectionists, mainly trying to control themselves and hold themselves to impossibly high standards. This is a student who has to get an A+ on every assignment. Ever known anyone, if you raised kids, some kids say, hey, I got a C, woo! And some, if they got below an A, it was a catastrophe for them. That's just how, again, that's often a sign of anxiety. Sometimes this perfectionism comes out in eating disorders. You know anyone with an eating disorder or a body image issue? Other people focus on criticizing, controlling others, and holding them to impossibly high standards. They do it through nagging and criticism. And here's the really, really sad, again, so if my anxiety goes up because of imperfection, then I can attack myself or I can attack you. Either way, somebody's getting attacked. And oftentimes what I've observed is it's both. They attack themselves and then they attack others. Not always do they do it with other people, but many, many times they do. And of course, do you know that this sentence is true? The more you criticize and control, the more unhappy you get. It doesn't even work. The highly critical people in this world are not also the most joyful people in the world. The more you do this, the more damage it does to you. You can actually develop what they call a negativity bias. You ever heard of this? Negativity bias? This is where you begin to only see the people around you through a filter of what they do wrong. Now, in many cases, they are doing far more things to please you than they are doing to hurt you, but all you can see is the bad. That's an oftentimes outcome of anxiety. It's like, I have to be perfect, everyone around me has to be perfect, and if you're not perfect, then I've got to criticize and control you so that you are, because your imperfections scare me. They make me feel anxious, and so I'm going to get this under control. Let me show you an example of this. Any of you remember a Christian band called the Barlow Girls? They used to be really popular from the early 2000s. They stopped, they were sisters, and they had some big hits. I think they had 4 #1 hits. They stopped touring together in 2012, so it's been a while since they were singing. But this is one of the Barlow girls. This one is Rebecca Barlow. She struggled with a terrible eating disorder from age 18 to 19. She would work out 2 to 3 hours a day, and she barely ate anything. Now, she eventually recovered from that eating disorder, but do you know why? When she was writing about this, she said this. She said, around the age of 18, she said, every time I looked in the mirror, I told myself, my goodness, how fat. You look terrible today. Now, makes sense why she had an eating disorder, doesn't it? Because when she looked in the mirror, she saw imperfection. And that triggered anxiety, and underneath all of it was the word she was saying to herself, you are fat and ugly. And the consequences of those words in her mind were so destructive to her emotions and her behavior. But her behavior was really rooted in what she was saying. So the key on your notes, and I know I have these a little bit out of order today, so find this part. It says, the key is, what am I saying to myself? When you feel anxious, what are you saying to yourself? When anxiety is going up, you're saying something to yourself. There's something going on inside of you that you were saying. She, Rebecca Barlow figured it out. She was saying to herself, you're fat and you're ugly. No wonder she felt so anxious when she looked into a mirror. No wonder her behavior became so controlling and she became so critical. It's because she had that belief inside of her. So the key is, what are you saying to yourself? And obviously, I mean, intellectually, everybody listening to me can say, yeah, you have to get comfortable with imperfection, right? I mean, intellectually, that just makes sense. Because is there anything perfect in your life right now? Perfect. Oh, my job is perfect. There's nothing I'd change about it, right? My spouse is perfect. Nothing I'd change about them, right? My kids, perfect. Wouldn't change a thing about my kids. They're amazing. Right, there's nothing perfect in this world. So if you can't handle imperfections, you're in trouble. So intellectually, we all get this, and yet when the anxiety goes high, imperfection scares anxious people, and they become more anxious, more critical, and more controlling often. Because the dial just keeps going up higher and higher and higher. One of the things that happens, it's so sad to me, is, and you'll hear, you ever heard of the idea of a continuum? Let me give you an example of this. Here's what's happening. Do you ever go to a doctor and see this chart? You go walk into the doctor's office, they're like, where's your pain scale? And they tell you a pain scale, okay? So that's called a continuum. Like if you get a paper cut and you're like, doctor, it's a paper cut, it's really painful, it's probably a 1, right? But if your arm is cut off, now you're at a 10, right? So there's a big difference in the pain scale. In the same way, there's a difference between something being bad and something being really bad. So using this scale, like let's say that after service is over, you are so hungry, so you go to Culver's to get some ice cream, and it's your flavor of the day. The flavor of the day is your favorite of all time. So you're so excited, you get a double scoop, and you sit down. You pull up, you get it, and you go lick, and it falls off onto the floor or onto the dirty floor of your car. You can't salvage that because it's covered in ugh. So now, where on the bad scale does that fall? Some of you are like, 10! No, it's not. It really isn't, right? It's, a 1 or a 2 because you can spend a couple of bucks and get some more ice cream. Not too awful a situation. But let's say that your boss asked you to do something last week and you totally forgot. Matter of fact, you don't remember till tomorrow morning we go to the office and your boss says, hey, where is this? And you're like, oh, I totally forgot that. And you get a reprimand from your boss. Now, let's say you're a good employee, so it doesn't happen very often, but they really kind of let you have it because they needed this for a meeting and you didn't do it. Now, all of a sudden, where does that fall on the bad scale? That's a little higher, right? That's like a 4 or 5. Who likes to get reprimands from their boss because they forgot something? That's certainly badder than ice cream on the ground. Now let's say you come home from work tomorrow night and the phone rings and it's your father. He's got pancreatic cancer. He has 2 weeks to live. Now where are you at on the scale? Do you hear there's a continuum of things that are bad? Would you rather have the pancreatic cancer or ice cream on the ground? The problem is, when people are struggling with anxiety and the dial gets spun up higher, the continuum is gone. Everything is bad. And everything is really, really bad. Ever see someone overreact to something? The ice cream hits the ground and all of a sudden they're acting like it's pancreatic cancer? It's like, oh, it's the worst thing ever. My shoelaces broke on the way to work out. I can't believe this. Everything is bad. And you're like, what is going on here? When anxiety is high, there's no continuum anymore. There's only really, really bad. And any piece of bad news is destructive to that person when the anxiety is high. I mean, literally, they have to have a perfect environment or else anything, even little bad things, become catastrophic. As a matter of fact, that's the word that's used psychologically. It's called catastrophizing. That's what they're doing. And this is what, when anxiety is high, it's what people do. They catastrophize everything. Everything is the worst thing that's ever happened in their lives. This is so sad to me. Part of the reason why I didn't rush through this is because in my life, I have children who struggle with anxiety. I have children who really struggle. They're all adults. They're all on their own. And I'm watching some of my kids really struggle with anxiety. And so I wanted to learn better about what's going on inside of them and how I might be able to help as a dad. So part of why I didn't rush through this is all my life now I can look back and see people in my life that I really loved who were consumed with anxiety, and I didn't know it, and I didn't understand it. So part of why I didn't rush through this was I want to help the people I love. And looking back, One of the things that makes me so sad about the people I know, who I love, who struggle with anxiety is when the anxiety dial goes up, at least two things really happen in their life that are sad to me. First, two-track thinking disappears. Two-track thinking is gone from their mind. Some of you have no idea what two-track is. I'll explain that. Two-track thinking is this. Here's what the American mentality is. This is what we believe. Life is about hills and valleys, right? Some days is, we're at the top of the mountain. Everything's good. Yay, the signs say. And then something bad happens, and now we're at the bottom. Whoa, boo, everything's bad. And we go up and down. We think this is what life is like, and this is a lie. If you believe this, you're going to be in trouble. This is not the truth about your life, ever. You live on two tracks at all time. All time. Every moment of every day of your life, you are on two tracks. One track has things that are going good in your life and things that are going well. I don't care about the worst moment of your life. If you could think about the worst moment of your life and think back to what was good in that moment, you would still be able to find good things. In the worst moment of your life, there were still some things good in your life. And at every moment, even the best moment of your life, there were still things that weren't going very well. In my life right now, things are going so good. I have so many things going good, and yet I also have things that are not going well. I always live on two tracks. You always live on two tracks. And when you're anxious and the dial is spun up, the second track disappears. Ask an anxious person what's good in their life, and they won't be able to tell you. This makes me so sad. Matter of fact, as I was thinking about it, prepping this message, I know gratitude is not talked about enough in our country. We don't talk enough about it. But I know grateful people. I know grateful people, but I don't know grateful people who are highly anxious. I know anxious people who are not grateful. Because when your anxiety goes up, you only think you have one track, and it's not true. It's never true. Incredibly sad to me. In the worst moments of my life, I had two tracks. In the worst moments of my life, I still had things that I could point to and say, God, I'm so grateful that this is still true. So this is sad to me. And the other thing that's really sad to me is that the only thing they do then when the anxiety goes high is they only picture a negative future. Once you get that dial up to 7, 8, 9, or 10 in your life and you're really, really anxious, all you can think about is bad things happening. This is what Israel did all the time. God, literally, this is incredible. He frees them from slavery in Egypt. He brings them right to the edge of the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is coming, and what does he do? He parts the sea, and they walk through a sea on dry ground with walls of water stacked around them. What an incredible experience. I've never seen that. Never walked through a dry sea that was parted for me, and they did. And he brings them through, and the Egyptians think, well, we can do it too. And God says, nope, no more Egyptian army, no more threat. I took care of all this for you. And then the next thing happens is they have something, we need some water, and their first thing is, God brought us here to kill us. That's what he did. He brought us here to kill us. You literally just walked through a sea parted for you, like the Mississippi, much bigger than the Mississippi River. Just like parted, you go through. All the bad guys gone now. And the first bad thing that happens, it's over. He hates us. He wants to kill us. But that's what happens when the anxiety is high. Everything is bad, and your future's bad, and nothing's going to ever be good again. That's so sad. It is not what God wants for any of us. God doesn't want you to picture a negative future. He has a positive future. And again, back to the question, you know why that's happening? It's because of what you're putting in your head. It's what you're saying to yourself, and you've already filled that part out. Because the reality is, some of you, what you're saying to yourself in those highly anxious moments is something here. I'm not safe. They're going to leave me. They're about to hurt me. I'm a loser. I'm unworthy of love. I'll always be alone. We could fill this. It's Rebecca Barlow looking in every mirror saying, I am fat. Every single mirror. It's what you're saying to yourself that's creating the anxiety that's driving your behavior. This is what's happening, and this is maybe the most important thing I learned in this whole series I'm about to tell you right now. I want you to think honestly. Do I struggle with anxiety? I want you to answer the question honestly for yourself. Is this an issue in my life? Do I feel anxious regularly? Because if you do, or maybe even situationally, then this is what you have to understand. anxious thoughts do not reflect reality. Your thoughts, your thinking when you're anxious isn't real. It doesn't reflect reality. You are now out of touch with reality when your dial gets spun up high. And you just need to understand. That's why I've been telling this story every single week, I think through the whole part of what I've been teaching on. There was a woman who struggled with anxiety all of her life. She said when she was in school, in middle school, she said this, I have this moment frozen in my mind, standing in my locker next to my friend Shelley, when I just knew in that instant that the rest of the year would be horrible. Remember what they do? They predict a future that's going to be terrible, right? When your anxiety is high, that's what you do. The rest of the year is going to be horrible. That every day would be full of isolation and pain and feeling alone. And she said, it wasn't. It was actually a good year. And then she said this, and I've quoted you this every week. Look at that second line. Anxiety doesn't track very closely with reality. You have to understand this. When you're feeling anxious, you are now no longer in touch with reality. The thoughts in your head when you're anxious aren't reality. You have lost touch with reality, especially those of you who really struggle with this or someone you love. Their dial goes to 8, 9, or 10, and you see it happening because you see those signs. You just need to know that they're no longer connecting with what's real. Because anxiety lies to you. It lies to you constantly. Just like this poor girl. It's going to be, every day is going to be bad. No, it really wasn't. It was a good year. You're no longer, and if you listen to that anxious message in your mind, so if you know this, okay, I struggle with anxiety or the situation makes me anxious, and I'm anxious now, if you believe what's in your head in those anxious moments, you will miss what God has for you. You'll miss the life that God has for you. And the good news is, completely treatable. Completely treatable. Brains can be rewired. The damage that was done from the trauma that you experienced can be undone. At any age, at any time. Brains, we know, we can hook your brain up to a machine and watch what happens when you think certain thoughts. We know you can retrain your brain. And for me, the most important thing I've learned about dealing with my situational anxiety is God's promises are the key to retraining my brain. This is the most important thing I have ever learned about retraining my brain in those highly anxious moments. It's what He's promised that retrains my brain. So let me show you how this works. I've taught on this before. If you've seen the ABC factor, we've talked about this before. This is what's happening in your life every single day. There's something in ABCs. The A is the activating factor. So something happens to you. B, there's a belief that gets formed in your mind, which is, by the way, beliefs are instantaneous. You're not aware of them. I'm not aware of them. But then there's an emotional consequence. That's where I get my first clue. I have said this so many times now for the last 4 years. God gave us an amazing gift when He gave us emotions. Amazing. Because if you will pay attention to your emotions, they will tell you when you have a belief that you need to consider or reconsider. So let me show you what this looks like in reality. Again, we'll go back to that. A boyfriend breaks up with you, and what do you think? Oh, I'll never be loved. I'll never find someone. And it's instant. You don't sit down and say, I wonder what the conclusion is that I should draw because of this boyfriend breakup. Well, I think conclusion number one. You don't do that. Beliefs are just instant. Your brain just forms them. It's just there. Oh, I'm a loser. I'll never find anyone. I'll always be alone. And the emotional consequences where you catch it, depression and anxiety. So if you're feeling anxious, there's a reason. There's a belief that's formed in your mind that's triggering the feeling of anxiety. That's why your emotions are essential. Pay attention to emotions. When you're feeling anxious, back up and say, I wonder what the belief is in my mind. Well, the belief is things will never get better, and it'll always be this way, and I'll never heal, and I'll never find someone. Oh, well, I can't imagine why you're feeling anxious. You've got to back up. What are the beliefs that are driving the emotions inside of you? And most people in America, the reason why this goes up and up and up and up and up and every year, and 40 million over the age of 18, and why it continues to get worse and worse and worse every single year, is because we don't know this. We don't know that there's an actual cause for our anxiety. We don't know that there are beliefs that are formed that are driving our emotions. And so we stop right there. But there are more letters in the alphabet than A, B, and C. There are D and E. You can dispute that anxious thought and then exchange it for the truth. And you find the truth in what God has promised you. That's where you find it. So that young girl could say, you know what? God says I'm worthy of being loved just as I am. So this guy doesn't get that. That's his loss. And God has made a promise to me that he will guide me to the right person in his perfect timing. Do you know he's promised that? He's promised to guide every step of your life. Did you know that? He promised you that. And knowing what he has promised you can counteract the underlying belief that's making you feel anxious. So let me show you how this could have worked with the nation of Israel. So God brings them out of slavery in Egypt, and I talk about them through this whole series because they are the most anxious people I know of in the Bible. I mean, full of anxiety, which makes sense, right? Is slavery traumatic on a human being? Slavery is pretty traumatic, right? You can be beat at any time, killed at any time, raped at any time. I don't know much more trauma in this world than being a slave. And they've been a slave for hundreds of years, so they are traumatized as a nation. So that's why, part of why I believe God does so many miracles for them, is because he is showing them that every promise he's made is true and spectacularly true. Literally, when they need water, you know what he does? He has Moses say, strike the rock. Moses strikes the rock, and a rock turns into a water fountain. Now, you go out and hit all the rocks you want after church is over, okay? And if any of them turn into water fountains, you send pictures to all of us. Because I have never seen a rock start pouring out water. I mean, this is just some of the miracles that God did for this people to say, you can trust me. That's what he was doing. He was rewiring their brain. My promises are true. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you. So they get all the way across the wilderness. They get to the edge of the land that God has promised to give them. They send 12 spies in. Some of you know the story. 10 of the 12 come back, and here's what they say. So here's the activating factor. The 10 spies come back, and they say, we can't go up against this people. They're stronger than we are, and the land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live in there. By the way, the biggest exaggerators in this world are anxious people. The biggest exaggerators in the world are the thoughts you have in your mind when you're anxious. Because look at what they actually say. The land is going to just rise up and devour us. Was the land actually going to devour them? No, not at all. You are not in touch with reality when you're anxious. You are not in touch with reality when you're anxious. Lock that in your mind. And so this is the activating factor. 10 of these 12 spies come back and say, yep, we're going to die. So the belief gets formed in the mind of the whole nation as they listen to the report. Oh, God brought us all the way here to let us die. He wants to kill us. He brought us here on purpose to let us go into this land, and then we're just going to be slaughtered because he just hates us. He wants to kill us. It's like, oh my goodness. Now, so if you start believing that about God, what's the emotional consequence you're going to face? Well, anxiety, fear, depression, despair. They're like, let's go back. We'll just go back to Egypt. We'll just beg the Pharaoh to take us back as slaves. We'll be slaves again. They can put the chains on our feet. We'll just take it. We'll make a false god. At one point, they make a cow, and they say, this is our God. He brought us out. Now he can lead us. It's like, oh my goodness. You are not in touch with reality when you're anxious. And that's where they stop. Now, that's not all that happens in the story. The other 2 spies that come back are Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb come back, and they're like, Caleb tries to dispute what they're thinking. Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses, said, let's go at once to take the land. He said, we can certainly conquer it. Now, he has a different attitude, right? He's not anxious at all. He's like, oh, let's go. Why? Because he's exchanged the anxious thoughts for the truth. What's the truth in this situation? He tells us, don't be afraid of the people of the land. They're only helpless prey. We're predators. They're our prey. We're lions. They're the little bunnies. We're predators. And why? Because they have no protection, because here's the promise. What's the promise? The Lord is with us. You want to know why Joshua and Caleb face the exact same situation and their anxiety is at 0? Because they didn't stop at A, B, and C. They disputed the anxious thought and exchanged it for what God had promised them. God has promised he's with us. You know what? We're predators. We're not prey. Let's go at once. We got them. We got this because God is with us. So they exchanged it They did the exchanged mind. God is with us. He's taken care of us so far. He's promised to take care of them. He's going to do this, and we got God with us, so we got nothing to worry about. And when you do that, then the anxiety dial goes down. Matter of fact, one of the psychologists, and this isn't a Christian, but I absolutely love this truth, never have an anxious thought without giving it an answer. Never have an anxious thought without giving it an answer. Answer your anxious thoughts. Don't believe your anxious thoughts. And the answer is rooted in what God has said, which is why it is imperative that you read a little bit every day from your Bible. Even if you, again, I live in the book of Psalms, let the promises God has made in that book just overwhelm your anxiety. Because they can. So answer your anxious thoughts. So when anxiety says to you, you are never going to get a good job, you turn it back around and says, you know, God says he's going to provide for all of my needs. Now, that may not be the promise that answers that anxiety for you, but the point is the same. You never let an anxious thought in your mind without answering it, and what God has promised you is the answer. He's promised amazing things. Anxiety says things will never get better. And God says in Psalm 23, I will restore your soul. What an incredible promise. Do you know what it's like to have your soul restored by God? It is dramatic, overwhelming, powerful, and it's his promise to you. That the pain that you've experienced to this point in life that feels like it's never going to get better and you're never going to get over it, that's a lie from the anxiety. The truth is God says, I restore souls. So let me show you how I've used this in my life, because I've used this for a long, long time. When in 1997, long time ago, my situational anxiety was spun up high. I'd moved to Dodgeville to start a church, knew nobody in the town. I'd raised financial support for 3 years, had a big family, and a year and a half into it, we had 8 people. It was the same 8 people that we basically had gotten within the first few months. Every tactic I had tried failed. Every single tactic. I was out of ideas. And now I had a year and a half of financial support, a large young family, and no way to take care of myself. I didn't have a degree. I had already failed at an established church, and now I was about to fail as a church planter. And so, do you think that might create a little anxiety in your mind? 5 young kids, no degree, you're failing at this whole church thing, and you have a year and a half, you have 18 months, and your money is gone, and you have to get a job that's going to pay for your whole family. It's like, I was so full of anxiety. And the anxious thoughts in my head were this. Anxiety was saying to me, oh, you are going to fail. You are going to fail, and this will be the end of your career. This is it, it's over. Now, how do you think that made me feel? They were in my thoughts. Those anxious words were in my head all day, every day. And I was full of anxiety. So I was bitter and irritable and cranky and snappy and just not a nice human being to be around. But I knew what I'm telling you is true, and I knew that God had an answer in his word. And one day I was just reading in the book of Matthew, and I came across this promise. Look at this. Jesus said in Matthew 16:18, I will build my church. And sometimes, this is what I teach you all the time, when you're reading something in the Bible and it just jumps off the page at you or strikes you, that struck me so hard that day. Because do you see my name in that sentence anywhere? Anywhere in that sentence, does Jesus say, my church is only going to get built if Brian Rudesill builds it? It's not in there, is it? Who builds churches? Only Jesus, period. Only Jesus. And when I read that day, it absolutely changed me. It's like, oh, I got a promise. I have a promise right here. I put that promise everywhere. It was easy to memorize. Jesus said, Matthew 16, I'll build my church. Got it memorized. So every day from that moment on, anytime the anxiety filled my mind and I started thinking, you're going to fail, you're not going to be able to provide, I immediately turned right back. Always answer your anxious thoughts. And I went right back to what God had promised. I said, that's not true. Jesus said he'll build his church. And then I turned it into a prayer. And I'd say to God, God, you promised this. You said you build churches, not me. So and again, faith is thanking God before you see it. Remember that? So I began to thank God that he would do what he promised to do before I even saw anything happening. If you want to know why I've experienced success in ministry, it is all because of that. It's not me. Because I'll tell you this, when it was up to Brian to build it, it was a complete failure. Zero success. I don't build churches. He does. And from that day on, this became my mantra. Anxiety said, oh, you're going to fail. It'll be the end of your career. You won't be able to provide for your family. And I would just immediately go back. Yeah, but God says, I'll build my church, not you. Start trusting me. And every time, so the result of doing this is I would go back to God. Every single time the anxious thought was in my mind, I quoted the promise. God, you said, this is what I'd say. God, you said you'd build your church, not me. Thanks that you will keep your promise. And before I even see what you're going to do, I'm excited, and I want to say thank you that you will keep your promise. Because he can't lie. He cannot lie. And everything, and by the way, that's when everything started happening. So if you learn to do this, you can change your life. So for those of you who struggle with anxiety, again, all of us have situations that make us anxious, right? All of us. It may not be very high compared to other people, but some people who really live with anxiety, I want you to start living again. Anxiety is holding you back. It's keeping you from the life that God has for you. Own this. There's no shame in saying that occasionally you feel anxious or you live with anxiety regularly. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of. In many, many cases, you didn't cause the trauma in your brain. It was done to you. So don't be ashamed of saying that. A couple of quick options for you. You can go online today and look for online counselors and start working with someone who specializes in anxiety. You can go to your doctor. You can call and do a televisit with your doctor and say, I know that I need something to help me with my anxiety, because sometimes it's just a biological cause. Your body can break down. Your body can break down, and they can help you get something that's going to just help get some space in your head. And make it your goal to read a chapter out of the book of Psalms every day. Biggest book right in the middle. And some days you won't hear anything. That's okay. Just come back the next day. Because one of these days you're going to see something that you never noticed before that God has promised you, and that's what you cling to. If you're exploring your faith with us here today or watching online, all of the promises of God are activated by faith, all of them. And it only begins once you allow him to put you in a relationship with him. That's where it all begins. Christmas and what we're celebrating this time of year is about the day Jesus came to be with us. He came in the form of a baby, an unpredictable thing. Nobody thought the Messiah, the Savior, would come as a child. They thought he would come riding on a white horse, waving a big flaming sword, and he'd take over everything. And he comes as a helpless infant in Bethlehem, this insignificant city, born to parents that were poor. Comes into the most humble environment, doesn't even have a home to be born in a barn. The King of the universe. And that was just the beginning of the surprising moves he made. Surprise after surprise, he came to serve us. And then he came to die for us, giving his life on a cross for the things in our life that are wrong. The unloving things we have brought into this world, Jesus paid in full for on the cross. Let me have you bow your heads. Maybe it's time for a relationship with God, and you can have that right now. With your head bowed, you can say something like this to Jesus. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I know I've done unloving things. And I've heard that when you died on that cross, you paid for them. Would you please forgive me? Please come and make your home inside of me today. Give me a new relationship with you, because I really want to experience your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up here today, if you're watching online, you can go to our website at PennyelChurchLife.com and just click the Get Connected tab, and you can just let us know if you prayed that prayer, and we'll send you some follow-up stuff in the mail. But to those of you here today, you can grab your little connection card, and you can just fill it out. Put your name down. You don't have to fill it all out if you're a regular tender. But if you prayed and asked him to forgive you or renewed your commitment, just let us know. If you want to be added to that messenger group, just let me know and we can add you to that so you can find out about these kids that need our help at Christmas time too. So we can, because no matter what, we're going to do everything we can to make sure every kid around us that we are aware of gets Christmas, right? That's who we are as a church. We are not going to let that ball hit the ground. So thanks for coming and hope to see you again next week.